¿Qué onda, amigos? ¿Cómo estáis, tíos? Hello and welcome to today's video. Today, I'm going to be comparing Mexican Spanish versus Spain Spanish. Now, if you don't already know who I am, I'm Nate. I learned Spanish 9 years ago in high school, and I learned Spanish with a lot of my Mexican friends. So nowadays, I speak a very Mexican Spanish. So what is the difference between Mexican Spanish and Spanish from Spain? Well, let's find out. Here we go! Okay, one difference we have is when we say carro versus coche, okay? In Spain, we'll say coche for car. Carro, we'll say in Mexico. Now, in Mexico, we sometimes do say coche as well, okay? So, more often, we'll use carro, which is definitely kind of an Anglicism, right? Coming from the English-speaking world, okay? So, we'll say carro versus coche, okay? Carro, Mexico, coche, España. Now, be aware, it's not caro, okay? If we say caro, then it's expensive, okay? Carro with that rolled R means car. Okay, next, this is an important one. You can't get this one wrong. In Mexico, we'll say tengo que tomar el autobús. And in Spain, we'll say tengo que coger el autobús. Be aware that the word coger has a different meaning in Spain than it does in Mexico, okay? In Mexico and other parts of Latin America, coger means to have sex with. Coger in Spain means to take, all right? So just be aware of that. Probably best that you just say tengo que tomar el autobús, make your life a little easier. So just be aware of that. All right, this third one is huge, okay? This is the difference between ustedes and vosotros, okay? So in Mexico, we don't use vosotros. What is vosotros? Well, vosotros is how we refer to a group of people informally. For example, if I'm saying, hey, you guys, blah, 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 I'll use vosotros in Spain if they're my friends, okay? Whereas in Mexico, we'll use ustedes. We do not use vosotros. Now, ustedes is both formal and informal in Mexico, okay? Ustedes is both formal and informal in Mexico. In Spain, vosotros is informal. Ustedes would be formal, okay? So, for example, hey, chicos, ¿cómo están? ¿Ustedes fueron a ver la película? Okay, that would be informal. That would be something you hear in Mexico. In Spain, we might say something like, and pardon me because my use of vosotros is very bad. ¿Vosotros estáis en el mercado? Okay, that would mean, hey, are you guys in the market? Whereas in Mexico, we would say, ¿ustedes están en el mercado? Ustedes están en el mercado? Okay, so that's a huge difference. Now, I was actually living in Spain for about 3 months, and while I personally wouldn't speak using vosotros, I could understand vosotros when it was spoken to me. So, if you're learning Spanish, this shouldn't be a huge problem. If you're more interested in learning Latin American Spanish, you don't need to learn vosotros, but if you're interested in learning the Spanish from Spain, then learn vosotros. Next is güey versus tío and tía. Okay, so in Mexico, we have the word güey, which, if you're not familiar with this word, this is a fantastic word, meaning dude. Now, do not say this word to someone you don't know because it can be taken offensively, okay? But between friends, it's very, very common and normal to hear, hey, ¿qué onda, güey? ¿Cómo estás, güey? ¿Qué me cuentas, güey? Okay, very normal, right? Now, in Spain, we'll say tío. ¿Cómo estás, tío? ¿Cómo estás, tía? ¿Qué me cuentas, tío? ¿Qué me cuentas, tía? Same exact thing, right? And in Mexico, tío and tía are going to be your uncle and your aunt, okay? And in Spain, they also mean that, but tío and tía are very commonly used to say friend, man, dude, that kind of idea. Next is papas versus patatas, okay? Papas, potatoes, patatas, potatoes. Papas, Mexico, patatas, España. Now, be aware, when we say papa, okay, that is potato, but if we say papa, that is father or dad, okay? So accents are important in Spanish, okay? So papa, right? The accent falls on that first a, right? Papa, that is a potato. Then papa would be dad, okay? Papa falls on that last a, okay? Okay, next is jugo versus zumo, okay? Jugo, juice in Mexico. Zumo, right? Zumo, Z-U-M-O, is juice, but in Spain, okay? Jugo, zumo. Now, an interesting story about zumo de naranja, orange juice, is that when I was living in Spain, in the south, in Sevilla, España, in the south, I saw something really interesting in different supermarkets, and that was they have these machines that actually fresh squeeze orange juice. It's literally this giant orange machine with a bunch of oranges in it. You press a button, and it will make you orange juice. It's really cool. And they say zumo, not jugo, okay? zumo. Hey, do you want to learn Spanish? Well, check out my website, SpanishWithNate.com. Where I teach you how to learn fluent Spanish. Okay, this is a really interesting one, and this is actually something that I learned fairly recently, and that is the difference between bañarse versus ducharse. So in Spain, if I say, hey, I'm going to go take a shower, okay, not a bath, but a shower, I'll say, me voy a duchar. Voy a ducharme, okay? I'm going to take a shower. Whereas in Mexico, you'd more likely say, me voy a bañar. Me voy a bañar or voy a bañarme, okay? I'm going to bathe, okay? So still, that can mean I'm going to take a bath. It can mean I'm going to take a shower, but rather it means I'm going to bathe, okay? But in Spain, more specifically, you can say ducharse. However, I have heard this used by some Mexican Spanish speakers, ducharse. Okay, next up, of course, is the famous Spanish lisp, right? So in Mexico, when we have the letters C, C, okay, Z, Z, and S, okay, we don't lisp them, but in Spanish, we will. For example, el cielo, okay, the sky or heaven, el cielo, versus el cielo, okay, same thing. Azul, okay, versus azul, okay. Now, in Mexico, this is really important. Please remember this. Z, C, and S, depending on the letters that follow it, make an S sound like we make in Spanish. For example, sandwich, say, okay? For example, cielo, okay? Zapatos, okay? That kind of idea. That's really, really important because a lot of times when I listen to Spanish learning students, they'll pronounce, for example, there's Z's like Z's, but you do not pronounce them like that. It's an S, okay? So, el cielo, el azul, versus el cielo, el azul. Next is celular versus móvil, okay? In Mexico, we'll say celular for cell phone, and in Spain, we'll say el móvil. Okay, then we have mesero versus camarero, okay? So waiter versus waiter. El mesero, we would use in Mexico. El camarero, we would use in Spain, el camarero. I've actually heard a funny tongue twister, which is camarero desencamarónamelo, which basically means, waiter, take it away from me. Camarero desencamarónamelo. It's a little bit difficult, okay? So, mesero versus camarero. Next, when we want to say apartment, in Mexico, we'll say departamento. We can also say apartamento, but more often you'll hear departamento. And then in Spain, we'll say piso, literally meaning the floor. ¿Cuántos pisos hay en este edificio? How many floors are there in this building? Okay? But in Spain, we'll say piso for apartment. Okay? Departamento versus piso. Okay, this is a really interesting one. This is the word video. Okay? This is a really interesting one. So in Spanish, it's written exactly the same. Okay? We just have a different pronunciation for video. Okay? So in Mexico, we'll say video. Okay? Voy a ver el video. Estoy viendo un video. Okay? Whereas in Spain, you'll say video. Video. It's hard for me to do this. Okay? So the accent just falls on that first E, the first I. A mí me encanta este video. Okay? With my kind of terrible Spaniard accent. Okay? So, a mí me encanta este video versus a mí me encanta este video. Next. Oh, this is a very good one. Esposa versus mujer. Okay? When we're talking about our wife, we say esposa versus mujer. Esposa in Mexico. Fun fact, esposas are handcuffs, okay? Look, I didn't come up with the Spanish language. I don't know what to tell you, okay? Mi esposa, my wife, okay? Whereas in Spain, we say mi mujer, literally translating to my woman, okay? Or my wife, okay? Esposa, Mexico. Mujer, Spain. Next is computadora versus ordenador, okay? This is for computer, okay? Computadora, Mexico. Ordenador, España. Now, a lot of times the word computadora is very long and hard to say. So a lot of times I would just say mi compu. Sounds kind of funny, right? Hey, ¿qué haces? Ahorita estoy usando mi compu. Okay, there you go. So instead of having to say computadora, you can just say compu. Okay, when I was living in Spain, I would hear this one word 24/7, and that is the word vale, okay? Vale, meaning okay. I would be walking on the street and I would hear people like this. Sí, tío. Sí. Vale. Vale. Seriously, you hear it so much, okay? So, vale is what you'll say in Spain for okay. All right? Sometimes Mexican Spanish speakers will say this as well. But more often to hear, está bien, está bien. Oye, mijo, quiero que limpies tu cuarto. Quiero que limpies tu cuarto. I want you to clean your room. Sí, está bien, mamá. Okay? Instead of saying, vale. Okay? We can also say, claro. I will say, sale. Sale is another thing that I will say. Very similar, right, to vale. Hey, ¿me puedes traer esa botella? Sí, sale. Yeah, sure. Sí, sale. Okay, so, está bien, sale, claro, bueno, versus vale. Okay, all meaning okay. Alright, this is a really interesting one, and this is the different use of the past tense. So, in Spanish, we have different past tenses, right? So we have, for example, the preterite, which are one-time actions in the past. For example, what did you do versus what have you done? For example, ¿qué hiciste hoy? Okay, that is something we would say in Mexico. Oye, ¿qué hiciste hoy? ¿Qué hiciste hoy? What did you do today? Whereas in Spain, we might say, ¿qué has hecho hoy? ¿Qué has hecho hoy? Both mean the same thing, okay? ¿Qué hiciste? What did you do today? Versus what have you done today? But the translation is still the same, okay? If someone says that from Spain, they're asking you the same thing. What did you do today, okay? ¿Qué has hecho? ¿Qué has hecho? Versus ¿qué hiciste? That's a pretty interesting one. And last but not least, we have the different uses of the future tense. Now, don't get me wrong. In Mexico, we do use what's called the simple future, but it's used much more often in Spain. So to give you an example, if I'm going to say, I am going to dance, yo voy a bailar. Okay, that is how we would say it in Mexico. And of course, people say this in Spain as well. However, in my experience, it's much more common that Spanish speakers from Spain will say bailaré. For example, I will dance tonight. Bailaré esta noche. Bailaré esta noche. I will dance tonight. People in Mexico say this as well, but it's more common to say voy a bailar esta noche. Okay, so like I said, in Mexico, and I would say Latin America on the whole, we'll use that ir plus a plus infinitive much more often. Voy a bailar. Vamos a tomar. Van a comer. Versus bailaré. Comeremos. Haremos. Harán. Dirán. Okay? That's kind of the idea. Once again, we use both in both places. Okay? But more common, we use a simple future in Spain and that little formula ir plus a plus infinitive en México. Well, there you have it. Muchas gracias por ver este video. Espero que hayas aprendido algo nuevo hoy. Y oye, si te gustó el video, por favor, dale un like y también suscríbete ya, porque realmente me ayuda mucho. Muchas gracias y ahí nos vemos en el siguiente video. Adiós.